Well, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to today's sixth installment of our Beyond the Studio Architecture and Practice webinar series. Today's topic is construction administration. I'm Wendy Mueller. I work in training here at BRR, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. For years, the BRR team has worked with colleges and universities to support the next crop of talent entering the architecture and design field. While the pandemic has canceled our plans for in-person office tours, mid-crits, and portfolio reviews, this webinar series does give us another chance to reconnect with all of you and to let you have a sneak peek into the real inner workings of an architecture firm. We're so fortunate and excited to have Dan Popp joining us today to talk about construction administration. Dan is an associate here at BRR. He's been here for 17 years. Dan is a member of AIA and is a lead accredited professional in the building design and construction area. Before I turn it over to Dan, just a few reminders. We will be entertaining any questions that you have for Dan at the end of today's presentation, but feel free to type them in the chat feature at any time. I'll be monitoring those. You can type in the right-hand side of your YouTube screen. You'll see the chat feature box right there. We are also recording today's webinar, so if your friends were not able to make it today on the live version, please let them know this will be recorded right here at the BRR Architecture channel on YouTube. With that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Dan. Dan, please take it away.
Thanks, Wendy. I appreciate the great introduction. As you said, I've been with BRR for 17 years, sorry. And I really enjoy what I do, especially part of the construction administration. I do pretty much everything from project management, contracts, all of that good stuff. So this is one area that I truly enjoy. It allows me to see things that have been designed and put on paper actually come to life. So so I'm happy to share any and all of my knowledge with you folks, and feel free to answer any questions or ask any questions. So we have gotten to the point where you've gotten a project, you've got your contracts done, you've done all your schematic design and your design development, and you've even completed all of your construction documents, and the contractor has a permit in hand. So, well, what's next for us as architects? The next step for us in architects is construction administration. So this is where we take all of that stuff that's in the contract documents and make sure that the contractor is actually building it. And there's several ways that we do that, and I'll kind of get into a few of these bullet points. I'll explain a little bit more about what construction administration is. The submittal process, which kind of includes shop drawings and samples. I'll show you some of the things about those. Requests for information. These are basically questions from the contractor asking a question he's unfamiliar with. Pay applications, site observations, and then a final punch list. So let's go ahead and get into it. So what really is construction administration? And I've always loved these pictures that they put out there on the internet that has a gentleman in a suit between two guys in the yellow pennies and pointing to stuff, and that's supposed to be the architect. And sometimes that happens on the job site, but more often than not, you're all inside a job trailer and you're talking about things, you're walking around and you're looking at stuff. So I don't necessarily think you're pointing at anything, but it is really good to get out on the job site. So all of these pictures have a bit of want to glorify what we do as architects, and I enjoy that very much. You can definitely tell who the architect is in all of these pictures, at least. So what it really means is our job is the architect's purpose in this phase is to ensure that the construction of the project meets the intent of the contract documents. The intent of the contract documents. Now, that doesn't mean to say it has to meet exactly. So there's going to be things that you're going to come across while you're doing this construction administration that sometimes doesn't really work. And so you have to work with the contractors on site and say, okay, I like this. This meets what I really would like to have done. It's not exactly, but it works. So this is where you, as the architect, get a chance to say, this is how it's supposed to look. This is how we want it to look. And let's work together to get it that way. So we have several things. You got your construction documents, you have all the details there, and then you're going out on the job site and making sure that so far, each time you do little visits, that this is what we're doing. This is what we're getting. I like this. This maybe needs to change. This might be wrong, those types of things. So in a lot of these things, we do it through project meetings. And lately we've been doing a lot of stuff on the web because we really can't just get to the site. So we've been exploring a lot of different technology as far as taking a video camera out on site or an iPad and doing FaceTime or anything with the video, and then walking through with the general contractor while we're watching everything on the video. So while you're on site, you may have your contractor out. You'll have your contractor out there. You might have some subcontractors that have questions. You might have your engineers. You might have the owner. So all of these people meet on a regular basis, depending on what your contract says, how often you're going to meet. You discuss the project and make sure everything is going along as you would like to have it go along. So that's where you're also discussing schedule and a lot of the different things of maybe there's some delays and what do we have to do to make things get back on track. So the next thing we're going to go into is submittals. Submittals can range anything between an actual shop drawing of like structural steel all the way down to just product data of maybe some equipment that you have in the building that you're responsible for, to finishes, paint, paneling, tile, all of that stuff. So if you're like me, well, most people aren't, but I'm one of those architects that's actually partially colorblind. So I have a lot of other people pick the colors and review those types of things, so I don't have to try to do it. So I get into the technical aspects of a lot of this stuff, and I leave the colors to the people who actually can see them. So what you're looking at now is the stuff that we had on 82nd and Metcalf. This is our office building. So this was a shop drawing that was submitted, and this was for all of our glass and aluminum storefront throughout the building. So they submit this information. The first thing you want to make sure of when you're looking at these is there's always a contractor stamp. If there isn't one, you don't even review it. You send it back, because that means the contractor hasn't actually looked at the drawings. So they have to look at the drawings and make sure that it's actually what it says it is and it's submitted correctly to us. And then that's the only time that we'll actually start the review. So what you're looking at on the left is the actual shop drawing of the aluminum curtain wall and storefront at the entrance of our building. What you're seeing on the right is actually what was in our construction documents, what we wanted to design, what we had designed. You'll notice in several spots that there's some dimensions that are different, 8'5", 9'1", that type of stuff. A lot of this stuff is based on things that we may not know. Some of the properties of the material, you can only span certain depth or long spans or anything like that. So looking at between these two pictures and these two drawings, does it match the intent of what you're doing? I have two horizontal members. I have both of them there. The proportions seem to be pretty correct. They're a little off, but I think they actually work that way, and I can accept this as long as all of these dimensions fit where we need to have them fit. So these are the things that you're looking for when you're looking at shop drawings. There's some small things down here. They called this down as door 1, but it's actually door 1A. So that we just corrected that to make sure that they are understand that is actually the wrong door. So you also notice that there's stiles at the bottom. Well, we originally wanted full glass, but during the design process, it was in the value engineering process, these doors were a little less expensive, and it didn't change drastically too much about the design, so we accepted it. So those are the gives and takes when you look at shop drawings and making sure it meets your design intent. Sometimes when you're going through these things, this is on another project we did. we designed a coping system that was on top of a curtain wall. And we wanted it to look a very specific way, 2 inches at the top, a 3/4 inch gap, the curtain wall. We wanted to have it slope towards the back. So when we put this in here, we worked with several of the contractors, and they submitted this shop drawing. This is the way that the curtain system has to work. This is the only way that the contractor will actually accept the warranty and move forward. So we went back and forth on many iterations. We have a 1-inch gap here. We still have the sealant. We still have a 2-inch reveal at the top. Yeah, the profile isn't exactly what we would like it to have been, but it's also about 25 feet in the air, so you're really not going to notice that too much. But the overall intent of what we were intending to design actually works. And this is actually the curtain wall member that actually will go into the system. So these are all the things that you look at when you're doing submittals. You may have to go back and forth and actually look at the designs with the contractor to make sure you're getting what you want. So the next thing, sometimes these types of things will also generate requests for information. Now, these are basically just questions the contractor has because he doesn't understand something in the drawings, or something's different out on site that maybe we didn't quite plan for. And this happens a lot when you do existing buildings, because you don't know what's underneath the skin of the building until you open it up. So we get a lot of requests for information when you do remodels because of that. So I'm going to quickly kind of give you an idea of how an RFI works. So basically, the general contractor will submit the RFI question, and in this case, he was asking about a clarification on the tops and sides of a stair that we had in a particular project. With the other dimensions provided, the stair detail, the 1/4 inch thickness appears to be a mistake. So, to provide clarity in this detail, please provide the thickness, and so on. So, he also had a proposed solution, which is something I often ask the general contractors when they submitted an RFI. Give me a proposed solution if you have something that you think might work, because it might work better than what we originally designed. I won't know until we look at it. So we looked at the proposed solution. We came back and we did not like that solution because one of the things about this particular staircase is all the treads were exposed, and in the original design, they were all supposed to look. It was supposed to look like one solid piece of wood and not with no joints. So that's one of the things that we ended up telling them, no, we wanted it as a solid piece of wood. So we went back and we edited our drawing, and indeed did have a mistake of we missed the one. Instead of having 1 1/4, we had 1/4. So our detail was revised. This is the actual detail that we wanted. And so when we sent them the revised detail, we got back a series of shop drawings that had the exact thing that we needed to have as far as in the design. This is what we wanted, and this is the way it actually came out. So this is an example of working back and forth with the contractor and coming up with a solution that meets our design intent, and it doesn't change the cost of the project, which is one of the things you want to do your best on when you're looking at RFIs, because RFIs can change the cost of a project dramatically if you're not careful. So you've gone through the RFIs, you've gone through shop drawings and submittals, and you're about 10 or 15% of the way into the project, and the contractor sends you a pay application. A pay application, what that really is the contractor is asking you to certify that I have this much work done on the project, so now the owner needs to pay me. That's basically what it is. So you'll look at these things that I have highlighted, $530,125. This is what he's asking to be paid on this particular payout. There's multiple ones throughout the project, depending on how long your project is. The things that we need to pay attention to is make sure it is notarized, because that's one of the requirements, and that it has been signed. You'd be surprised at how many times these two things are missing. So, and when they are, we just politely send it back and say, you need to go ahead and correct this and send it back to us. If all of this looks correct, and then we'll go on to the next page, which this is where they outline all the things that they've got, that they've paid for, that they've done, and so on. The biggest thing that you need to pay attention to, or I pay attention to when we look at this, the first thing I look is to make sure this number here, this 530,125, matches the one that's on this sheet, because sometimes they don't. And so you want to make sure that those are actually matching. Then you want to go through and you look at all these numbers, and this is their percentage of completion, how much they've spent or how much time that they've actually done. And this is what they say: I've got 20% of this completed, so I want to be paid for this amount. If you're doing shop or site observations and things like that, and you see the information and you see that, yeah, we think he's got about $105,000 worth of work done, he's about 20% done, then you can go ahead and say, okay, he's good with that one, and you just go down the line and make sure that all of those items are met. And if he's about 10%, if the project's about 10% done, this is where you have to kind of just understand that, do I think it's that far? And if you're within a few percentage points, it's not a big deal. But if he's saying he's 50% done and we just started the project, well, that's kind of a problem, and you want to address it with him and say, well, that's not right. So those are the two things, and you'll get these like I said, every month. And there's sometimes where we won't review these. It just depends on the contract with your owner. So, but on this particular project, we were actually asked to review all the pay applications that came through. So, site observation visits. This is the funnest part of what I consider in the in construction observation or construction administration. I love going out on the job site. One of the things we do when we go out on the job site is we're observing. We're not inspecting, we're just observing what's out there. And if we see something that doesn't quite look right, we'll check it, we'll note it, and we'll let the contractor know. So, and we're letting them know that what we did. We will provide a field report after we get done with the project, telling them when we were out there, who was all on site, and that type of stuff. So one of the things that you never want to do is tell them how to fix something. That's not what you do in a site observation visit. You're only there to point out things that you've seen and observed, and then you report that to the general contractor for him or her to fix. So in one of these particular situations, this picture right here shows we have several bolts that were in this column. Well, in the shop drawings, the splices, which is what this is, these bolts were actually reversed. This part of the head was actually supposed to be on the outside because people will be walking by here and you'd get hurt. So what we said is the column splices on level 3 are not the same bolts as the approved submittals. So they came back and said, while we were on site, that they would go ahead and remove all the end of those bolts. Well, they realized they couldn't do that. So they ended up having to swap the bolts and reverse them. So all we did was point out that there was an issue. We didn't tell them how to fix it, just told them there was an issue. So same thing with this piece here. We identified that this looks like a patch and we need to make sure that it meets the intent of the drawings. And basically they needed to cover up those marks and make that one solid piece, basically, because they just had it tack welded in there. So we wanted to make sure it looked completely solid when it was finished. Other thing you do is when you're going out there, you're just generally looking for any cracks or damages or things that might not be right. In this particular picture, it's kind of one of my favorite pictures. This is a ventilated deck up here, so our insulation actually goes on top of the deck and inside the flutes for an acoustical deck. So it had some really nice patterns on the floor and everything, and I thought this would be a nice picture. But we were just making sure that all the studs, all the framing, all of this stuff up here was looking like the way we asked for it to be in the construction documents. When you're out on the construction site and looking at the observations, there's a whole bunch of things that you look at and make sure that you have noted. Sometimes steel studs. We want to make sure that the right steel studs are being used, the correct gauge, the correct size, those types of things. Make sure you have those in your drawings, because sometimes these studs will get mistakenly put in at a lesser gauge, which for us, the walls don't work that way because they flex way too much. So we usually call out a higher gauge or a lower gauge stud, so that way we can make sure that the walls are relatively stiff. You're also looking at hangers. You're looking to make sure that this actually is in the right place. Sometimes they're not. So if you notice that that's in the wrong place, then you bring it up to the contractor and say, I think this is possibly in the wrong place. Maybe you need to look at that. So those are the things that we do while we're out on the job site, is looking at all those things, because it's easier to fix this now while everything is still open than it is when the wall's actually closed and you got finishes and everything else on. This is the time to catch most of those mistakes. This is the best time to catch them. So this was another area that we were looking at, and this is our patio on Avenue 82. That's the outside patio. It's a separate slab from the interior slab. So when we were looking at it, we were making sure that when they poured this first one, they had some issues with the edges of this concrete. So they had fixed that, and now they were doing the back pour between the two slabs. So that way it became, there was a gap between the two that allowed those two slabs to move separately. So now they were backfilling it, and we wanted to make sure that we got exactly what we needed in those gaps. So when you're done, when the contractor's done, I should say, and you have finished all your site visits, and the building's basically buttoned up, the finishes are in, everything is probably 98%. There may be a few things here and there that need to be finished. We go out and we do a final punch list. This is the opportunity for us to make sure that everything that we have asked for in the contract documents, throughout all the construction observation visits and the RFIs, everything has been done exactly the way we asked it to be done. Sometimes quality has a tendency to come into here where it's not as what we had asked for. So sometimes these things happen where subcontractors get switched in the middle of the project, and so one has a different level of quality than the other. So this is the final punch list where we go through and we look at all this stuff. This was on a particular project that we had for a distribution center. And when we were walking around up to where these stairs are, this was to get onto the roof, we noticed that there were some bolts missing from some of the structure. So this is something we would point out and say, missing bolt connections. So we don't know why the bolts are missing. Maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe they're not required. We don't know, but we want to make sure we point it out. And then the contractor, when he's going through and look at all these things, he's going to address them and say, yes, these have been done. And then that's when you go back and you do your actual repunch and make sure everything was done the way you asked it to be done. Here, this is on the roof. In the detail, which I was hoping that would show up, but it didn't. In the detail, this is a walk mat on the roof. And basically what that does is add an extra layer of protection on the TPO so you don't poke holes in it. This was actually supposed to go over the top of this expansion joint. And the reason for that is to protect the roofing and the bellows in the expansion joint. Then they were supposed to put that yellow caution tape down. So we had a detail that showed that. So basically what we do is we identify it and say not per the detail and tell them what it is. And then they'll go back and they'll fix this. Another thing you're looking at out there is things that are missing or broken. In this case, corner of the contract or corner of the concrete has been broken. Somebody might have driven over it with a vehicle or whatever. We don't know, but that needs to be fixed. They can't leave it that way. In this particular instance, there's supposed to be an expansion joint in between these two floors. So that way it allows the floors to move separately, but it also closes it up so people don't trip. So there's an expansion joint it's missing. It's missing the actual joint. So we pointed that out. In here, there's other things that if you see damage, like in this particular case, the concrete wall, precast wall looks like somebody had hit it with something and it cracked the concrete. So we need to have identified as damaged concrete, and they'll have to come back and repair it. Now on the one on the right is a little different because this is where it gets into the design aspects of it. So this is in our original design, this entire thing was supposed to be one piece. It was not supposed to have this joint here. So what we did is we let them know that in our drawings that this column wrap is supposed to be one solid piece with no joints. So sometimes, depending on the material that you're using, they may not be able to get it in a long enough piece to actually do it that way. Sometimes it's just a matter of the contractor had two of these pieces laying around. He thinks he was doing the intent of what the design was supposed to be and went ahead and did this. In this particular case, we made them change it because we knew that you could get this in one solid piece. So, and that's what we wanted. Some people may think that that wasn't a big deal, but for us in the particular design that we were looking at, it was, and it wasn't a very expensive fix either, and it wasn't going to cost anything for the owner. So that's one of the things that we have to be careful of when we're actually out there looking is, like I said, make sure that all of the things that we're doing do not add cost to the project unless the owner approves it. So I'm going to kind of in closing, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the things that I've seen throughout my career. And this is just some of the recent stuff that I've noticed. So in these two slides, these are really, if you just look at them normally, they're not a big deal. But when you add an exit sign, and this actually happened to be in an assembly space, you can't have an actual door handle here. It has to be a panic exit hardware. So that's actually a code violation. So that's something that we had to make sure that they got changed. Same thing happens here. So while most of the time it's not an issue, in this particular case it was, because these are emergency exit only. So you have to have the panic exit bars, pardon me. So we pointed those out as well. These are a little bit different. So the gentleman on the left is probably not stacking brick correctly. Now, while that's not anything in our purview, it's something that we would sometimes point out to the contractor, saying this might be a bit unsafe. You might want to check that. But it's ultimately up to him to make sure that his job site is safe. And the way he's stacking these is not. So this one here is definitely a problem. I'm stacking everything up in front of the actual exit. No one's getting out of that building. So these are things that you also that I've found in many projects, and I know it's not. We all know it's not done intentionally. Okay, it just happens that someone just found an open floor space and put stuff wherever they wanted to. So and they're not really versed with the codes like we as architects are. So these are things you have to kind of look at when you're going through these projects. This one is a little bit more if you're not in, and I only really understood what this was probably about 10 years into my career. But a cardboard sign that says men working on equipment do not switch on is not an acceptable way of locking out, which is what you're supposed to do in an electrical panel. There's actually keys that you're supposed to have that you lock out. You take that key with you, so you know that no one can turn it off. But this is something that if an inspector came in and saw that, he would be all over the general contractor. So these are things, and this is an OSHA thing as well as a code violation as well. So you can't really do that. So these are things that you have to really make sure you get on quickly. So that's pretty much my experience. Like I said, I love doing construction administration. I love getting out on site. That's the funnest part of what I do. I love solving problems too. But I think being out on site and actually watching the building come to life from the drawings is probably the best part of construction administration. I mean, in the entire process of architecture for me. But that's just me. So other people don't want to do that and they like the design. We have many people in our office that are really good at design. I leave that definitely to them because you design it and I'll build it. I'm happy with that. So that's pretty much it for me. I'll turn this back over to Wendy and I'll be looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, just a reminder, audience, that if you have any questions, to go ahead and type them into our chat feature on YouTube. Dan, thank you. That was a very interesting presentation.
No problem. I enjoyed it.
Some of those mistakes or no-nos were quite high.
Yeah.
All right, we've had our first question come in. Have you ever seen friction? I'm sure I know the answer to this, between a contractor and the architect during construction?
So yes, and that does nothing for anyone when you're out there on a job site. One of the things that that you as the architect out there are also have to keep in mind is that keeping the project moving and making sure the client, one, is happy, and two, everything is going the way that they would like it to have it go. So if you start having issues with the contractor and you start arguing with them at every turn, um, things can drag out a lot and they will drag their feet. There's that old adage, you can get more bees with honey, or however that is, being actually working towards a common goal of getting the project done and working together is much better than arguing about every little thing that happens on a project. If you find that sometimes, and it's just inevitable, that there is friction between the contractor and the architect, sometimes it's time for a change of people, maybe someone else being brought in to help with that process. So, but getting along with the contractor out on site is best for everyone. And not to say that you roll over and play dead, it's just that you work together for that common goal, so, of getting the project done.
Yeah, and relationship management is such an important part of anyone's job, and that's actually a nice segue to what we'll be talking about next week. Before I introduce that topic, though, we do have another question. How do you keep track of RFIs, Dan? And do they sometimes conflict with one another?
So we have a tool here in BRR. It's called ProTrack, and sometimes contractors have these as well, that we track all the RFIs when they come in and the responses and so on. RFIs usually don't conflict with one another. What happens is you'll respond to an RFI based on the information you have, and then once that RFI response has been sent out to everyone, everyone moves forward to that, and then maybe at some point in time it comes back, or another RFI comes back, and it appears that it looks like it conflicts with that other one, but actually what ends up happening is something has changed in that process, and now we've got more information, and now we have to go back and say, okay, well, the original RFI that we had probably wasn't the right direction, so now we're going to go ahead and move in this direction based on this information. But by having both of those RFIs as part of the project contract documents, you can see the progression. That's the most important, is documenting the progression of each one of these items and making sure that everyone knows, everyone's on the same page, that yes, we had an issue, we went back, we looked at it, and there's a nice progression if anyone wants to go back and take a look at it. So
great, that's a good answer. Okay, we have one more question.
Okay.
During the submittal process, do contractors often suggest alternate products than what is specified in the drawing? And how do you handle that?
So they do. And sometimes it's usually for cost reasons, or maybe they can't get it. How we handle that is we ask them to submit, an alternative material, alternative sample for consideration. One of the things that we look at as architects when we're looking at that, like, let's say, just an example, you have a tile that you wanted to use that is imported from Italy for whatever reason, and now there's something that happened over in Italy, and now they can't get that tile anymore. So the general contractor says, hey, I can get this tile, it's the same color, not quite the same texture, what do you think? And so you go back and you look, and if it meets the intent of what you're doing, it meets your standards for slip resistance and all those other things, if you're okay with it and the owner is okay with it, then you can by all means proceed and accept the alternate, and then it gets put into the contract documents and things move forward. So that happens a lot. I mean, it's not like it's a one-off thing, but it does happen quite often that sometimes substitutions are asked or requested, and sometimes we take them, sometimes we don't. Just depends on what the reasoning behind it is. If it saves the money, if it saves the owner money, and it also saves time, and it doesn't change the design, it's almost a no-brainer to say yes. So, okay, awesome.
I am not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so everyone who's been on today, I just thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to remind you that a week from today is our final in our 7-part series. Next week's topic is professional communication and networking. A very important topic. We hope that you can join us for that one. Again, like always, please register on the Eventbrite website with the BRR page, and we will send out further information on the event. It'll be at this YouTube channel, same address, same time next Tuesday. So thank you again for joining us today. We hope you all have a safe and happy 4th of July, and we hope to see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.